So what yardstick do you use? If you can't use the current policy baseline, everyone I talk to believes this bill does violate that. It does add to the deficit under current law because you're just, renewing these Trump tax cuts that would otherwise have expired. She hasn't ruled on that. So it will be up to the Senate itself to adjudicate that. I think of the things that the Senate may overrule the parliamentarian or bypass her, this is the one that's most likely. It's core to the bill. The main reason that Republicans don't overrule the parliamentarian is they're worried about sort of vitiating the filibuster. In other words, if you allow everything from financial policy to immigration policy to abortion policy in this bill, then you basically create a huge backdoor and the filibuster doesn't really exist anymore. And they want that filibuster there when they're in the minority and try to oppose Democratic initiatives. So yeah, basically, I think what's going to come down to is this will come before the Senate, and J.D. Vance or who's ever sitting in the chair will simply say this is kosher. There may or may not be some further votes on that, but I think it's going to stay because this is core to the bill. The bill can't survive without this baseline.
Fascinating. Democrats have plans to challenge apparently about 60 provisions inside the bill, specifically the Senate Finance Committee's portion of this. That's where all the controversial stuff is when it comes to taxes and Medicaid. Is this just a lot of noise? We stay up all night with a big vote-a-rama, or could they actually make some meaningful changes here?
They've already made some big progress. I think some of our subscribers, especially those at the Federal Reserve, really care about. There was an attempt to slash Federal Reserve employee pay. Basically, Republicans think that they're paid too much of a premium above regular Treasury employees, and they wanted to bring them down to that schedule. That was ruled ineligible. That's out of the bill now. There was also an attempt to zero out the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is a longtime target of the GOP. There is an attempt to do mass layoffs at the agency, and that's been put on pause by the courts. But this was an attempt to just zero out their funding. And the parliamentarian basically said, no, that's policy. You're going to need 60 votes to get rid of this agency. You can't just backdoor it through this. There were some Environmental Protection Agency emission standards as well for motor vehicles that were stricken. So they've already had some success. Big ones that they're looking at, there's gun regulations in this bill, a deregulation of short barrel shotguns and silencers, a big goal of the gun advocates. That probably will be stricken out, in my view, just based on experience. There's also an attempt to stop states from regulating AI. And that's a bit controversial. It takes away their broadband funding if they do regulate AI, but that probably will be stricken as well.
Fascinating. So the silencers come out. The AI component was one of the most controversial things at the end there. Erik, we were all asking lawmakers where they fell on this, and it may not end up in the final version, which is fascinating. The Democratic staffers are meeting with the parliamentarian today. What goes on in these sessions? Are they arguing over stuff? Are they just kind of presenting their notes that the parliamentarian then takes away to consider? How does it go?
I do think it's a bit like an arbitration. Both sides do get their hearing and then they do get a ruling. Sometimes the rulings come out. Apparently last night, very late, we got a press release 1 minute to midnight or so, on this CFPB ruling. Sunday, I think there's going to be a lot of activity on all of this. It's very much, she's a lawyer. They're all pretty much lawyers. There are a lot of faces that we see circulating around this, people who've been former parliamentarians weighing in. It's a very specialized set of knowledge, but the main criteria is it primarily budgetary nature? Is the real purpose of this provision to get the revenue up or down, to get the spending up or down, or is there a hidden or not so hidden policy objective? And that's pretty much the criteria that she goes on. And of course, just it's a kind of very specialized, almost like you've got sports fandom. Like some people say, okay, she gives one to Democrats, she gives one to Republicans, a lot of mind reading going on. But in the end of the day, I think the operative thing is that Thune told us, as the majority leader in the Senate, he's not in the business or very interested in really overruling her on all this stuff. There's probably some pressure from people in the White House that just don't like institutions, don't like guardrails. But I think Thune's a bit of an institutionalist. He certainly spent his time in the minority arguing the Democrats shouldn't get rid of the filibuster. And he's so far holding to that. And as long as he does, they're going to go with what the parliamentarian says.
He must be thinking, President Trump, don't make me overrule the parliamentarian. Erik, what's your thought on timeline? Before they adjourned this week, Republicans in the Senate said they're still looking for a midweek vote. Is that real? Next week? or is that too
I think
ambitious?
it's very, very ambitious. It could be real. What we were reporting on the other day before the Juneteenth holiday, there's an attempt. One of the key problems here in the bill is Medicaid provider taxes. It's basically a gimmick that states use
Yep.
to up their federal reimbursement. Now, this is apparently crucial to a lot of rural and teaching hospitals, keeping them afloat. So this has drawn fire from the likes of Josh Hawley, Susan Collins, across the spectrum here. For some states that use this, which really is an accounting gimmick, to up the reimbursement.